Today's story is about a mother who was told that her own children were not hers. At first, everyone thought the explanation had to be simple: a lab mistake, a paperwork error, maybe a swap sample somewhere along the way. But then the tests were repeated, and each time the answer came back the same. And by the end of this episode, one hidden part of this woman's body will completely change the way you understand what DNA can actually prove. This is the Body Files from the SCP Labs podcast. Let's get into today's story. In 2002, inside a courtroom in Washington state, a pregnant woman named Lydia Fairchild sat and listened as strangers discussed whether her children should be taken away from her. Lydia was 26 years old. She already had 2 children, and she was only days away from giving birth to her third. And the reason she was in court was not because anyone had seen her hurt her children. It was not because a neighbor had called in a complaint. It was not because her children had said something frightening at school. She was there because of a DNA test. The test said the father of her children was definitely their father. But Lydia was not their mother. That was the impossible part, because Lydia had carried those children. She had given birth to them. She had held them when they were newborns. Her family remembered the pregnancies. The children's father remembered the births. But on paper, according to the most trusted kind of evidence anyone could offer, Lydia Fairchild was standing in front of the court claiming children who did not genetically belong to her. And then, because she was still pregnant, the judge ordered something extraordinary. When Lydia gave birth to her third child, a court officer would be there to watch it happen. That officer would see the baby come from Lydia's body. Blood would be taken immediately from Lydia and the newborn. Then the court would test them both, and finally, everyone would have the answer. So a few days later, Lydia gave birth under observation. There was no swap, no missing baby, no confusion in the hallway. And 2 weeks later, the result came back. The baby Lydia had just delivered was not genetically hers either. This story is called The Mother Who Wasn't Their Mother. A few months earlier, Lydia Fairchild was just trying to keep her life together. She was living in Washington state. She had separated from her children's father, Jamie Townsend, and she was pregnant with their third child. That kind of separation is hard enough when there are no children involved. But Lydia had 2 little kids depending on her, another baby coming, bills that did not care how overwhelmed she felt, and all the ordinary details of motherhood still happening around her. Breakfast still had to be made. Clothes still had to be washed. Someone still had to find the missing shoe, wipe the sticky hand, answer the little voice calling from the next room, and keep moving even when the adult part of life felt like it was cracking. So Lydia applied for state assistance. It was supposed to be paperwork. Not easy paperwork necessarily, but still paperwork. Forms, signatures, questions about income, questions about dependents, and a process that was meant to confirm who the children's parents were. As part of that process, both Lydia and Jamie had to provide cheek swabs for DNA testing. The idea was simple. The state needed to confirm that Jamie was the children's father and that Lydia was their mother. And to Lydia, that second part barely seemed like a question, because she was their mother. She was the one who had been pregnant. She was the one who had given birth. She was the one living the daily life that no lab report could see. So she gave the sample. And then she waited. When the results came back, Lydia was called into an office. She probably expected a conversation about benefits, maybe more documents, maybe some frustrating rules she had to satisfy before the application could move forward. But the people in the room were not acting like this was routine. They were serious. Very serious. And then they told her what the DNA said. Jamie Townsend matched the children. He was their biological father. But Lydia did not match them. She was not their biological mother. At first, that must have sounded so absurd that it almost did not feel frightening yet. Because some accusations are so far away from reality that your brain rejects them before the fear can land. Lydia knew she had given birth to those children. There were photos. There were records. There were people who remembered. There were children in her life who called her mom because that is what she was. So the first explanation was obvious. The lab made a mistake. Maybe someone mislabeled a tube. Maybe one sample was mixed with another. Maybe the test was wrong in some ordinary, annoying human way. And if that was all it was, then a second test would fix it. So the state ordered another cheek swab. Then another. Then another. Each time, the same answer came back. Jamie was the father. Lydia was not the mother. That was when the tone of the case changed. Because now, officials were no longer treating this like a strange lab error. They were treating it like fraud. From their point of view, Lydia had applied for assistance using children she claimed were hers, but the strongest evidence they had said they were not hers at all. So the questions became darker. Was she pretending to be their mother to get benefits? Had she taken children who belonged to someone else? Was there a surrogacy situation she was hiding? Were the birth records somehow false? And the most frightening question of all was not spoken like a medical mystery. It was spoken like a legal problem. Should Lydia's children be removed from her care? For Lydia, this was not abstract. This was not a debate about genetics in a classroom. This was her life. She had to walk into court and try to explain that the tests were wrong, even though she did not know how they could be wrong. She had to tell people she was the mother while the paper in front of them said she was not. She had to bring photographs and memories and the testimony of people who had seen her pregnant, and all but kept running into the same wall. DNA! Because DNA felt final. It felt cleaner than memory. Cleaner than emotion. Cleaner than a mother saying, I was there. I gave birth. I know these are my children. And that is what made the situation so terrifying. Lydia did not just have to prove that she loved her children. She had to prove that her body had actually made them. At first, she could not even find a lawyer who believed the case was winnable. And you can understand why. A lawyer could believe Lydia personally. A lawyer could think she sounded sincere. A lawyer could look at the photographs and the family members and the birth stories and feel, on a human level, that this woman was telling the truth. But in court, feeling is not enough. And against DNA evidence, Lydia's story sounded almost impossible. So she represented herself. She gathered what she could. She brought photos from her pregnancies. She brought pictures of herself with the children as infants. She tried to make the court see the life that existed outside the lab report. But the case kept pressing forward. And then Lydia told the court something important. She was about to give birth again. Her doctors were scheduled to induce labor very soon. So if the court thought the first two children were somehow not hers, then this third baby could settle everything. Watch the birth. Take the blood immediately. Test the baby right away. No one could argue with that. So the judge ordered a court officer to be present. When the time came, Lydia went into the hospital with the weight of the courtroom still hanging over her. Most people who are about to give birth are already carrying enough fear. They worry about the pain. They worry about the baby. They worry about complications. They worry about whether everything will be okay. Lydia had all of that. But she also had something almost no mother would ever expect. She had to give birth as evidence. The court officer watched the baby come from her body. Doctors drew blood from Lydia. They drew blood from the newborn. The chain of custody was protected. The test was sent away. And for a moment, Lydia must have thought that finally this nightmare would end. Because whenever the other tests had said, this one could not be misunderstood. This baby had come from her body while a court officer watched. So when the result came back, there should have been no room left for doubt. But the result did not rescue her. It deepened the impossible. The newborn did not genetically match Lydia either. Even after the court watched her give birth, DNA still said she was not the mother. That was the moment the case became too strange for one explanation. If this had only happened with the first two children, officials could imagine a hidden story. Fraud, surrogacy, a switched record, something Lydia was not admitting. But now they had a newborn baby who had been seen leaving Lydia's body, and the test still said the same impossible thing. That meant the problem might not be Lydia's story. It might be the assumption everyone had built the case on. Maybe DNA had not lied exactly. Maybe everyone had asked it the wrong question. That was when a lawyer named Alan Tyndall became interested in Lydia's case. He looked at the evidence and saw what everyone else saw. The test results were strange. But now, because of the third baby, they were strange in a different way. This was no longer simply a mother's word against a lab. This was a lab result contradicting a witnessed birth. And somewhere in that contradiction, there had to be an answer. As Tyndall dug deeper, he found another case that sounded almost unbelievable. A woman named Karen Keegan had needed a kidney transplant, and as part of the search for a donor, members of her family were tested. But the testing suggested something impossible. Two of her sons did not genetically match her as their mother. Karen had the same kind of problem Lydia had. On paper, her own children looked like they did not belong to her. But in Karen's case, doctors eventually found the explanation. Karen Keegan was a chimera. A chimera is a person whose body contains two distinct sets of DNA. And the easiest way to understand it is this. Most people begin as one fertilized egg, and that egg divides again and again until it becomes a whole body. So, most of the time, if you take DNA from someone's blood, cheek, skin, or hair, you expect the same basic genetic profile. One body. One person. One genome. But sometimes, very early in development, two fertilized eggs can fuse together. Instead of becoming twins, they become one person. And that one person can carry two genetic lineages inside the same body. One set of DNA might be in the blood. Another might be in certain organs or reproductive tissue. From the outside, the person can look completely ordinary. They can grow up, live their life, have children, and never have any reason to know that their body contains more than one genetic identity, until the wrong test is taken from the wrong place. In Lydia's case, the state had been testing cheek cells. Those cells told the truth about one part of Lydia's body. But they were not the part of her body that had passed genetic material to her children. So investigators tested more tissue. Hair, skin, blood, cheek cells. Again and again, those samples showed the same DNA profile that did not match her children. For most cases, that would have ended the investigation. But Lydia's case had already broken the normal rules. So the testing kept going. Finally, a sample was taken from Lydia's cervix. And there, hidden in a part of her body no cheek swab could ever represent, scientists found the second DNA line. That DNA matched her children. Now everything changed. The original cheek swabs had not been fake. The lab had not necessarily mixed up every sample. The tests had not simply failed. They had tested Lydia, but only one version of Lydia. Her children had inherited genetic material from another version of her body, a version the first tests had never reached. Once Lydia's mother also submitted DNA, the pattern became even clearer. The children matched Lydia's mother in the way grandchildren should. The family tree was there. It had just been hidden behind the assumption that every part of Lydia's body would tell the same genetic story. And after all of that, the court dismissed the case. The judge admitted the conclusion had been wrong. Lydia Fairchild really was the mother of her children. But the damage of being told otherwise did not just disappear, because for months, Lydia had lived inside a nightmare where the most basic fact of her life had been put on trial. Not whether she was a good mother, not whether she needed help, but whether she was a mother at all. That is what makes this case so different from most medical mysteries. There was no strange rash, no poison, no outbreak. No doctor standing over a patient whose organs were failing. The mystery was quieter than that. It was hidden inside the idea of identity. We like to think the body is one thing, one person, one genetic truth. But Lydia's body was not that simple. Her body was a record of something that had happened before she had memory, before birth, before anyone could look at her and call her Lydia. Somewhere at the very beginning, two possible lives had fused into one. And decades later, that invisible event almost cost her the children she had carried. The eerie part is that Lydia did not feel like two people. She did not live like two people. She did not look in the mirror and see a clue. There was no obvious warning that part of her body carried one genetic signature, while another part carried a different one. To everyone around her, she was simply Lydia. To her children, she was Mom. But to the first DNA tests, she was a stranger. And that is why this story belongs in the body files. Because the body did not attack Lydia. It did not poison her, infect her, or collapse in a hospital bed. Instead, her body did something almost more unsettling. It divided the truth. One part of her body said one thing. Another part said another. And the people around her trusted the first answer so completely that they nearly ignored everything else. Her memories, her photographs, the witnesses, the birth records, even the live birth of her third child. All of it was forced to stand beneath the authority of a cheek swab, until one hidden sample finally revealed that Lydia Fairchild had been telling the truth the entire time. She was not pretending to be their mother. She was not hiding another woman. She was not lying about the children in her arms. The answer was inside her before any of them were born. A quick note about this story. It is based on real medical and legal events, but some scene details are reconstructed for narrative clarity. This episode discusses DNA testing and chimerism in a simplified way for storytelling, and it is not legal or medical advice. This episode is not a substitute for professional genetic counseling, medical diagnosis, or legal advice. This is the SCP Labs podcast.